All right. Well, let's get into it. We'll get started here. We're just after the hour, and so I hope you guys are ready to talk about speeding up your WooCommerce store. If you're in the wrong webinar, right, this is the time you can drop off. But if you're here to talk about getting your WooCommerce store to go as fast as possible, then you're in the right place, right? What do I mean by getting your store fast, right? We're going to cover a lot of different stuff. But just this last week, a week and a day ago, I got called up because we had someone that we knew whose website had just crashed, and they had several thousand people visiting the store at the same time, and they were having problems, right? So we said, okay, let's bring a copy of their store over. Let's do a little bit of code review, and their pages were loading. The regular product page was loading in 14 seconds, and some of the other catalog and other pages were loading in 24 seconds. And you go, oh, that is insane, right? The store looked beautiful, but from a performance perspective, as you know, right, that was just not going to cut it. So today we want to talk about how do we help your store get a lot faster. All right. First thing you should know is delays, like a 2-second delay, can end up creating more than a 50% decrease in session length, right? So if people on average spend 4 minutes on your store, and they have to go between pages, and between those pages, it takes more than 2 seconds in terms of the delay, then instead of spending 4 minutes at your site, they could spend 2 minutes at your site. And of course, the hardest part about that is that it's normally in the tail end of the session when people actually do the conversion, right? When people choose to click the buy button. So you're going to lose revenue, you're going to lose conversions, but most importantly, people are not going to hang around, right? They won't hang around slow stores. And you go, oh, that is not fun, right? But then you go, well, so how fast should my site be, right? And a study that was done last year looked and said, hey, if we're talking about optimal conversion, right, then your store should load somewhere between 1.8 and 2.7 seconds across device types. And that 2.7 is also Google's magic number for when they sense that you are customer focused, right? So if your store loads in less than 2.7 seconds, you are customer friendly. If your store loads in more than 2.7 seconds, you're not customer friendly, right? And then they don't put your links near the top of the pages, right? And you go, oh, that's not good. So optimal speed, now it ranges, right? But optimal speed is you need to be fast, right? And the truth is, on the site we were working with last week, right, we were able to get a bunch of those pages down between 0.4 and 1.4 seconds of load time, right? So if you do the right stuff, if you pay attention to the right stuff, you can definitely get your site to load fast, right? And that's what we want. And it's across device types, right? So don't forget that you may have, depending on what your store is, you may have 60, 70% of your traffic coming from mobile, which means you want to pay attention to mobile as well, right? And that's what we're saying here. In 2017, a different study showed that 53% of all the visits were coming from mobile, right? And so mobile, you go, oh, wow, I need to make sure that my designers, my developers, or myself, depending on who's building the site, is actually paying attention to all the devices to make sure that it's running fast, right? A 100 millisecond delay, right? A 100 millisecond delay can hurt conversions by 7%. And you go, oh, God. Of course, the whole point of this webinar is not to spend all this time giving you stats about how important speed is, right? We'll just tell you flat out, speed matters. But what we want to do is go past that, right? Normally, what you hear from people, right? You'll hear if you're talking to a developer, talking to an agency, right? You normally hear this, hey, you can get it fast, you can get it cheap, or you can get it good. Pick two, right? You can't get all three. I want to highlight that when it comes to performance optimization, we definitely can choose things to do to optimize our store that are fast. We can also choose several things that are cheap, and there's some other things that are really, really good to do, but may have a little bit of cost. And so what we're going to do is cover all of those, right? Cover all those so that you go, okay, well, now I have a long list, And again, this webinar is being recorded. We're going to send you the video. We'll send you a copy of the slides so that you'll have this list for you, right? So let's talk about the stuff that's fast, right? Let's just talk quick hits, things you can do right away. Number one, if you're not using a plugin anymore, get rid of it, right? And you're going to say, yeah, but what does that have to do with performance? Well, you don't know how that plugin works or whether or not that plugin is making calls or whether that plugin is doing anything that you don't want it to do. I would love to tell you that every plugin is coded perfectly, but as you probably know, there are plugins that you buy that you go, this didn't do exactly what I thought it was going to do. And that in and of itself tells you, my expectations weren't being met by this developer or by the people that created it. So if you have plugins that you're not using, right, get rid of them. That's super easy, super fast. The other thing is some people, probably not you, but some people use really big plugins to solve very small problems, right? And so what happens is you go, oh, I wish that I could put, I wish I could stylize the text underneath the quantity button that shows how much stock is in inventory. And you go, okay, that would be cool. And then you're either you or your developer is like, I think there's a plugin for that. And so you go and you download a plugin, and it's a plugin that all it does is change the color of that text, which, by the way, you could do with a snippet of code or you could do with CSS. But now you download the plugin. And of course, that person, in order to get that plugin to be cooler, it also does 5 other things. None of the other 5 are the things that you're using it for. But now you've built or you've brought in a fairly big plugin to do something that's very small. There are other plugins like that too, right? And they are not just about making something look pretty or changing a color. They may change functionality, but it may be the case that you could change that functionality with a simple line of code. So don't bring 40 lines of code or 100 lines of code to do a 1-line code problem. And you're going to say, yeah, but Chris, I don't know which things are 1 line, 2 line. I'm going to show you a place where you can go get some more snippets. But the point is, this is one of those things, even if you're the store owner, but not the developer, you want to be talking to your developer and saying, hey, we got a lot of plugins. Tell me what that one does. Tell me what that one does. And when you start hearing certain plugins that you go, we're using a plugin for what? Then you can start going, maybe I don't need that plugin. And the other thing is that you may have, as a store owner, you may have said, oh, it'd be nice to have this. Now, maybe you're lucky. You're working with a developer or an agency who says, I don't think you want to do that. Like, you're going to get a tiny little boost in how pretty it looks or the color or drawing attention to it or whatever the benefit is, but you're going to slow it down by, half a second, right? And 5 decisions like that will suddenly have a page loading in 3 or 4 seconds. So sometimes you just have to push back a little, right? And say, oh, I don't want it if it's going to have a performance cost, right? So don't look very carefully, be very clear about which plugins you're using. And if they feel like they're doing something that, you could just ask the question, could this be done with a line of code, right? It may be a function that the developer or the person who's assembling the site for you just may not know how to do it and therefore chose to do it with a plugin. And then, of course, the third one, and I know this affects everybody because you're like, wait a minute, I paid money to get that. I paid money to get that theme, and you're like, right, but that theme is bloated, right? That theme is heavy. 2 weeks ago, we worked with a store, and the store was running really slow, right? 7 seconds on page load, and we said, we think this is the theme, so we said, we're going to make a copy of the whole site into another environment. We're going to flip out that theme, put in a lightweight theme, and fundamentally have the same site, right? It won't look exactly the same, but it'll function exactly the same. And we even brought a bunch of the images over so that it would look closer to the same. And it loaded in a 1.5 seconds, right? And the customer's like, I don't understand what happened. You're like, well, because that theme you picked is just it's overkill, right? And the code is just not clean. And normally what happens when we go to buy themes, we buy it based on the look. Of course, my recommendation, right? I'm going to tell you, hey, when you buy a theme, buy it based on how lightweight, how fast it loads, not, how pretty it looks. You can make a lot of things look pretty. You can't make a lot of things performant, right? So choose to start on the performance level, all right? Now, what else can you do this fast? Well, compress your images, right? That's kind of a no-brainer. You're like, let's go in and let's say, let's get a Liquid Web. We use a product called Tiny PNG. We're getting ready to roll out Photon, which is a service inside a Jetpack. Both of those services are available. There's also Kraken.io. There's several of these guys, and they will all help you compress your images. Because you know what's happening, right? Is that someone sends you the image of the product, or someone sends you the images they took of you or your products or what have you. They got into your Dropbox, you took them from your Dropbox, loaded them straight into WordPress, and you were loading 5 megabyte images for what could be a 20 kilobyte load. And you're like, I shouldn't do this, right? But you will never convince people to not load in big, heavy images. So use another product, a service, to compress them so that your images won't take a long time to load. That is the biggest reason sites load slowly, other than external code and JavaScript calls, etc. But the biggest reason is image size, right? And image weight, really. The second one on this screen, right, is remove user-specific elements on your pages. Now, I know that years ago, it was super cool to show the actual cart in the sidebar of every page so that as people were navigating, they could see how many things were in their cart. You don't have to do that, right? And in fact, most stores have gone away from it because it makes it harder to cache those pages and deliver high performance on those pages, because you've added something that's really user specific and dynamic on the page. So if you don't need to, right, don't. It may change the design element of your site, but getting rid of some user specific elements will definitely make your pages load faster, right? And these days, I got to tell you, the third one on this list is pretty easy. For most hosts, it is just a toggle, right? Flip the switch and go to PHP 7. You can also call your hosting company and say, hey, I want InnoDB as the storage engine for my database. 2 quick hits, very fast, almost immediate benefit, right? You'll see your store move a lot faster because of it. And if it turns out that something isn't working right because some theme is not coded right for PHP 7, it's a great time for you to, again, use a lightweight theme and move on from something that doesn't really leverage the latest versions of PHP. So those are the fast ones, right? Now let's talk about the ones that are cheap, right? You may have a little bit of cost, but very little, right? And oftentimes it's simply not a cost, but it's I have to do a little bit of work, right? Not as fast as the other ones, but still something that won't kill you to help you make your store faster, right? The first is change your theme to something lightweight, right? So remember I said get rid of bloated themes? Well, we're going one step further, right? Change your theme to something lightweight. And you're going to say, well, Chris, how do you know what's a lightweight theme? Well, let me tell you, right? We did an evaluation of 50 different e-commerce themes, right? Ran them through Paces, 50 different themes, same store content, ran them through a bunch of automated tests, and then took the performance data from it and discovered that the lightest weight theme out there, right, the fastest performing theme out there, was Astra, which is a free theme, right? So you're not even spending money. Now, there is a pro plugin that goes with it that adds some WooCommerce configuration stuff to it. At Liquid Web, we roll out the pro version to everybody in our managed WooCommerce offering, but you can, if you're on another host, you can just go and buy the pro edition and add that in if you want, which will let you configure some of the display options for your WooCommerce store, right? But Astra is great. Storefront, which is by Automatic over at WooCommerce.com. Storefront is another theme that did pretty well in the top 5. Definitely not the first, but not out of the running, right? So in the top 5, and there's several others that you could take a look at. So lightweight theme, right? What I'm going to tell you, right, another way of saying that is if you went to a marketplace, a well-known marketplace, and we're looking at WooCommerce themes that also came with a whole bunch of bundled plugins, now you get 4 sliders and 2 form builders and this, that, they're not in the top 5. They weren't in the top 20. So you just want to be really careful about where you choose to select your theme, but Astra and Astra Pro and Storefront are very high performing themes. Now, another thing you can do, which won't cost you a lot, but may cost you a little, if you go to codeable.io, right, codeable.io, you'll be able to ask for someone to say, hey, I want someone to review my database for orphans. And you go, what's an orphan, right? And an orphan, right, is something that was left in your system even after you turn it off or removed it. So let's say you installed a plugin, and then when the plugin was done, you said, okay, I don't want this anymore, and so you deleted it. But for some reason, other things were left, right? They might have been left in your post meta table, or they might have left some transits. They might have left something that you go, what is this? And it's just sitting there, right? Maybe they created custom tables, and then when you delete the plugin, it deleted the files and left the tables there. But you can have someone go look for that and go, okay, let's go in and let's tackle this stuff so that we get stuff that that goes through this, right? So what you want is someone to go look for orphans, look for things they can get rid of, right? And that way you can get to a place where you're going, oh, my database is performing better because I don't have these orphans in here. And of course, in terms of understanding how that works, every entry, every row that you have in your database, right, adds a tiny incremental amount of work when you're querying the rest of the database to get the real data out that you want, right? And so in the end, what you want is the cleanest, most streamlined database that has nothing in it that shouldn't be there, right? And then the third one, right, is limit Woo functions on non-Woo pages. So here's what we know, right? When you go to the cart page, when you go to the My Account page, there's a whole bunch of things that are going on. When you go to a product page, there's a whole bunch of things going on, because that product page isn't just a page. That product page is a lot of different templates pulled together, and therefore you have a lot of CSS for each of those different parts of the templates, and you have some JavaScript assigned to some of those buttons. And so all that stuff is happening. But here's the thing. What happens when you go to a blog post, right? Well, the default for WooCommerce and the default for WordPress as you do this is that it loads all those CSS files and it loads all that JavaScript just in case, right? And it's just in case because maybe you have a blog post, but in the middle of your blog post, you use a short code, and the short code points to a product, and now it's going to have to display that product and the button, and therefore it wants all that JavaScript and all that CSS to play out. Well, if you know that you're not using those short codes in those places, you want to be able to turn off those Woo functions, those calls to JavaScript, those calls to CSS, turn them off on all your non-WooCommerce pages. And that way, they only add weight where they're supposed to, and they add no weight where they're not supposed to. All right. Let's continue on with the cheap stuff, right? Shouldn't take a lot of work to do this. There is a Query Monitor plugin, right? And when you install it, you can then run your normal work through the page. And as you do it, right, you will be like, oh, hey, look at this. I can see the query counts and I can see the speeds on all the different plugins and all the different parts of my site. And that's important when you start realizing some of those trade-offs you're making, right? You may have added a plugin to do a little something here. You may add a plugin to do something there. And then you realize, wow, this plugin's actually hitting the database a lot, right? One of the things we don't realize is every single e-commerce store, in terms of performance, comes back to the same thing. How often are you hitting the database, right? Now, it totally makes sense to hit the database when you say, get me the list of products that I need to show on this page. That makes sense, right? It makes sense when you say, get me the different sizes of this t-shirt and the different colors available of this t-shirt so that I can evaluate those and buy one. That totally makes sense. But there are other things that don't make sense, right? So for example, let's say that you were using some plugin that said, hey, instead of putting my t-shirt sizes in a dropdown, and instead of putting the color in a dropdown, let me display it visually, right? Let me use these little icons and graphics to actually present all the different sizes of the shirt and all the different colors of the shirt. I can use little swatches to show the colors. And you go, there's nothing wrong with that. And you go, right, if it's coded correctly. But if that little tiny plugin that is showing you color swatches is making an inappropriate number of calls back to the database just to show you those colors, right? Then you'd have to ask yourself, is the swatch in the improvement of the overall UI worth the performance degradation of the store, right? And that's when you realize, no. So if you can get those little swatches to load up fast and have very little impact on your database, then by all means, you should do it. You should do anything like that, right? But if you start seeing, and you start using this query monitor plugin, you start seeing it's making a lot of queries. It's going back to the database a lot. You go, this is a chatty plugin and it's delivering low value. Nope, let's turn it off, right? Let's kill it and get it out of here, right? So that's the trick there, is use query monitor to help you understand, right, how your different plugins and the trade-offs that you're making are playing out, okay? The next one, this is what happens on the inside of your store, right? And most people don't spend any time thinking about the inside of their store. They just go, oh, let me optimize the UI. Let me optimize what's being presented. Let me optimize the CSS. But the reality is, every time you log in, or anytime someone who's managing your store logs in on the back end, right? And in the back end, they're actually doing work, then all those dashboard widgets and all those admin queries, they're all having a performance hit on that server, which means they're having a performance hit for your customers. So if you can, right, go in and limit the dashboard widgets, go in and turn off or limit the admin queries. Now, I remember I told you, right, hey, if you don't need a plugin and you can just use a snippet, then by all means do that. So if you go to this place, right, github.com/lukecav/code snippets WP speedup, he has a whole list of snippets that you can put into your site without having plugins, right? It'll turn off some dashboard widgets, right? And so it'll do some of those things. They're all documented. They all explain what they do. Luke is one of the guys on our Liquid Web team. And more importantly, the plugin that you would get to put these little snippets in is a plugin called Snippets, right? And so you can download and install Snippets, and then you can go to this github.com/lukecav and find these snippets and go, okay, let me take a couple of these that I really do want, put them in the snippets and activate them, and you will see some performance increase. So again, these are all cheap and quick ways to help make you move forward. So now let's talk about the stuff that's good. Now this will take a little more work, but it's worth it. Now you're going to look at this and go, hey, hold on. Chris works at Liquid Web. Is Chris going to tell us that we should all just move to Liquid Web? Nope, I'm not going to tell you that. I'm going to tell you that you should consistently, every 2 years, evaluate your hosting. And you're going to go, wait, even if I'm at Liquid Web? Yeah, even if you're at Liquid Web. Doesn't matter where you are, right? Every 2 years, go take a look and see if there's another host. Take a copy of your site, put it somewhere else, give it a trial, run it, right? You may or may not make a move, but you want to be checking out hosts. And you go, why? What's the secret here? Why the every 2 years? Well, it turns out that hosting companies, either the actual host you're working with or the company behind them, which is the real hosting that's going on, because sometimes you buy hosting from someone and then it turns out they're using someone else to do the actual hosting, which is totally fine too, right? However you do it, whether you own your own data center or you have someone else as your provider. But at the very bottom line, when you get to the core of where someone has actual servers, those people have to pay for those servers, right? They have to make an investment. They buy servers and stick them in racks and they run them. And in every one of those hosting companies, they're going to say, well, can we get another year out of this, or do we have to go buy more equipment? So every one of the hosting companies out there is on some sort of buying cycle of when they're replacing their equipment. And you can guess, right? If you move your site onto brand new equipment, it'll go faster. If your site is on older equipment, it won't go fast, right? So what you should do, if you care about your store, right, is evaluate your hosts and consider changing them every couple of years, right? Now, Some hosts, like us, right, will continually make investments in our own data centers and just move your store from one part of the data center to another so that you get that benefit. But still, nonetheless, what you want to do is evaluate changing your host every couple of years to see if you can get better equipment, right, for the same price or even potentially cheaper. The second one, right, is there's a couple of different plugins that you may want to check out, right? Now, I'm normally the guy that tells you don't use a lot of plugins, or only make sure you're using really high quality plugins, and also use snippets if you don't need a full plugin. But these are 3 that are worth checking out, and it's because they do some specific things. So my favorite in this list is WP Disable, right? Where WP Disable lets me go in and turn a lot of things off, including some of those dashboard widgets that we were talking about, and some other components that will slow you down that you don't necessarily need. Now, the reason this is in the good section and not in the fast or cheap section is because in order to use these, right, in order to do some deferring on your JavaScript calls, in order to use auto-optimize to concatenate some things, minify some things, cache some things, in order to use these tools, this is not a click, 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 now my site is fast. This is I make a copy of your site, I put these in, I start testing it, I change the settings, I test it again until I find the optimal what works, right? So invariably, right, this is not fast, this is not cheap, but it is really good. And so you want to take a look at some of these. And the third on this list, obviously, is consider getting more RAM and having enough RAM that it is more than the size of your database. Now, I mentioned, right, that in all e-commerce, what's really happening is you're making calls back to the database. But if your entire database is 6 gigs of data, and you can put that into all the, put it all in RAM so that you're running on a server that has 8 gigs of RAM, for example, and you can put the whole database in RAM, then by all means, right, your store will run faster because it's now hitting the RAM rather than running all the way back to the database disk. So yeah, allocate more RAM. Now, this will have immediate benefit, right? If you increase the RAM so that you have more RAM than your database size, it'll have immediate benefit initially as you start seeing more and more demand. Eventually, as you get even more demand, you're going to need to add more CPU power, right? Because it's multi-threaded and you want to get more workers working on your stuff, right? More nodes at play, and it's not just a RAM game. So eventually RAM will tap out. It won't give you as much as you hope it will. Over time, you'll get to a point where you go, okay, I've given this thing enough RAM. In order for me to speed this up now, I need to start looking at CPUs. But initially, if your database is 3 gigs of RAM and you're running on a 3 gigs of space and you're running on a 2 gig of RAM server, right? Allocating more RAM, upgrading to something that has more RAM might be a very quick hit to get you to a faster place. All right, now, there's gonna be a lot of people, right, who read cache everything and say, well, first of all, you can't cache e-commerce. And then second of all, they're gonna say, yeah, but if you cache everything, then all you ever see from a performance perspective is what's cached, and you don't know what's really going on under the hood, right? Some other people will say, well, hey, if you're caching things, eventually you have to clear the cache and re-roll it, and that's and reload it, and that's going to cause performance problems in that interim, right? When you flush the cache, you go, yeah, all those things are true. So let me back up and say this. Your goal should be, right, to make sure that you are doing everything you can to speed up your site, everything you can to make it highly performant before you turn on cache. If caching is what's making your site fast, go back to the basics and get all the rest of it done. If you've done everything that we've covered in the list already, if you've gone in and changed your theme, if you've gone in and optimized your queries, if you've gone in and cleared out your dashboard and stuff that's in the back end, if you do a lot of those things and now it's running fast, cache will make it go even faster. But if you use cache to hide the fact that you have poor performing code, that's not going to help you. And the real trick here, right, is the second part of this tip, right, which is use cookies for bypass rules, right? You go, oh, well, okay, what's that? Well, you can start with, really, free Cloudflare, which will give you 3 page exceptions, and where you say cache everything except, and then you write 3 page exceptions. The page exception for /cart, the page exception for /checkout, and the page exception for /my-account, right? And you go, okay, those are 3 bypass rules, right? And so then that's easy, because then everything else gets cached, but not those things. And you go, yeah, but that's not exactly what I want, because my product is variable product, and I want you to be able to look at the drop downs of sizing and coloring, and that's not going to work out when it comes to, like, okay, what, I don't want to cache that part. I want it to be dynamic. So you realize, oh, yeah, I don't do that. But that's what you get in the free plan, right? But if you go all the way up to the $200 a month plan, which is not for everybody, but is definitely for some stores that are making good money and realize I want to go faster. What we did with a store just the other day is we put them on the $200 a month Cloudflare plan that is their business plan. And they have another feature called use cookies for bypass. And what that really does is says it lets you say cache everything on that site, everything you can possibly cache it all. But if the person coming back has a cookie, right, then skip the cache. And you go, whoa, what does that mean? Well, it means that if you have browsers, people who are coming to your store and running around, but they never put something in their cart, they never check out, they're just browsing around, it's all cached. It's fine. It's great. They're not doing more than just, window shopping. So great. Make it super fast and easy for them. And then if they add something to their cart, you can clear out the cache. You can make sure they're not seeing cache stuff, and they can navigate in real time, which is why I said make sure your site is fast in general, right? Don't use cache as the blanket to make everything better. Use it to just enhance the work you've already done. And then we have 2 more, right? Which again, sometimes can end up feeling controversial. They're really not. Don't send emails from within your store, right? Don't have your store doing the hard work of figuring out what, when, and who to email. And don't use the WooCommerce reporting. And you go, oh, but I don't have another way to get it reporting. And there are other ways, right? But here's what you need to understand. When you use WooCommerce reporting, right? When you go in and you look at WooCommerce reporting, what ends up happening is you're asking the server to do work for you. Go pull this, go query this, go do, and when you're asking the server to do that, you're asking the server to do something for you rather than do something for your customer, right? And those queries for those reports can be pretty taxing. So you'll slow your server down for other people, right? And other people's ability to shop at your store. That's not what you want, right? And so that's the final tip, right? On the left side here, you see, best thing you can do to speed up your store is keep it focused. Keep it focused on, for the core, right? Keep it focused on doing the shopping cart work. We use, at LiquidWeb, we use glue.io for reporting, and we make that available to all of our managed WooCommerce customers. We also use Jilt for all the abandoned cart and follow-up emails. So Jilt does a bunch of emailing for you. And we use Algolia, though we're getting ready to do a deal with Jetpack so that we use their Elasticsearch. But we're still, either way, we're going somewhere else, right? We're using an index remotely rather than index on the server, right? And so when you use Jetpack's or Algolia's index on their servers, when you use Jilt for their email servers, when you use Glue for their data mart and their reporting, it makes sure that your store is focused on just being the cart and the store. And that will get you to the place you want to be in terms of performance. So that's our coverage of these tips, right? My name is Chris Lemma. I work at LiquidWeb as our VP of product, and you can find me on Twitter at Chris Lemma. And we're going to open this up for questions now, in case you have any. And then if not, we'll just wrap this up. Like I mentioned before, this has been recorded. It is being recorded, and we will get this recording out to you so that you can have this and a copy of the slides as we wrap up. So with that, we'll open it up for questions. And I see that there are already a couple questions in here, right? So let's see. The first question was, Todd was wondering, hey, do you have suggestions or examples of a lightweight theme? And I think that was probably asked back when I was telling you not to use a bloated theme, because later in the thing I said, hey, check out Astra. So that is that's the one we recommend. It's the one that we deliver to all of our customers. It's very lightweight, though there are several others too, right? Storefront is another one that works pretty fast and is also free. All right, and then Todd asked again, hey, where's the list you have of all the theme speeds? That is not public. I'm sorry. Our constant performance metrics around themes and plugins and the stuff we do internally is part of our secret sauce over here at LiquidWeb. So unfortunately, that is not something that we publish. We do publish things like this is the fastest or this one beat this one, but the list of all those findings is not public, right? And then Rabia asked if a recording is made available. Yes, absolutely. We will definitely get you a recording, right? So if you don't use the reporting function, Rebecca asked, do you uninstall it or you just leave it passive? Well, you can't really uninstall reporting from WooCommerce, so it's just there. But if you don't use it and you don't have your staff hitting it, querying it, pinging it all the time, you'll probably be fine, right? The real issue is getting that data out of WooCommerce somewhere else, right? So that you can run, all sorts of reports there and know stuff. Because I'm not suggesting you don't want to know about your store. You do want to know about your store. You just don't want to know about it at the cost of the customers that are browsing your store. All right. All right. And Brad asks, hey, what's the main difference between LiquidWeb's managed WordPress and managed WooCommerce hosting? That's a great question, Brad. Our managed WordPress is focused on delivering high-value WordPress hosting, like a bunch of other players that are out there doing WordPress hosting. So we do malware scans, and we do backups daily, and we do we, as I mentioned earlier, right, we do image compression for all of the images loaded up onto all the WordPress sites. We also have a very, so in that, up until the image compression, we do a lot of stuff that everybody does in managed WordPress. There's a couple things we do that are a little different. So we do image compression for everyone in managed WordPress, and we do plugin updates, which is very different than most places. So what we do is we make a copy of your site. Every night we check to see if there's any plugin updates available for your site. Then we make a copy of it if there is. Then we take photos of your website. Then we update a single plugin, then take photos again. Then we do a visual comparison between those photos. And if nothing's broken or gone wrong, then we send a call to your production server and say, hey, it's time to upgrade that plugin. And we do that for every single plugin. So we may do that 20, 30 times if you have a bunch of plugins that need updating. Plugins that are left unupdated is the single biggest opening that you have for malware and other security vectors that come in and attack you. So what we want to do is make sure your plugins stay up to date. So that's all on the managed WordPress side. When you move to WooCommerce, man, really different, right? Because, and you could run, just to be clear, you could run WooCommerce on that infrastructure over a managed WordPress. You just won't get all the things that we add when it comes to managed WordPress. So managed WooCommerce has additional features, like we talked about Jilt, we talked about reporting with Glue, we talked about whether it's Jetpacks, Elasticsearch, or Algolia's indexing. We have all those that are extra that you not only do you not pay for or that are included in the price, you definitely don't get those in the managed WordPress. Also, we have some dedicated staff that do performance evaluations, and we can run performance tests at any given moment to help you figure out what's going on and even make recommendations on plugin swaps, right? So we just worked with a customer last week where they were doing a marketplace, and the marketplace was using a plugin that was not very optimal. And so they had a lot of different issues. And so we tested a different plugin and brought it to bear on the situation, and they're getting ready to migrate to that new one soon. And then we help with the migration. So it's a white glove service, hands-on service to help you with your store. And then on top of all of that, we've made a significant investment in the underlying data structures for WooCommerce, so that when you go to save orders, if you're in one of those situations with really high concurrent traffic, we can swap in a different structure, data structure for orders that makes your ability to write more records or write more orders significantly better. than the current standard of WooCommerce, right? It's not a fork, it's just an added plugin that changes some data sets and allows you to push data in a different place, but it enhances the overall performance of your WooCommerce store. So there's a lot more in there than what happens if you're just using our managed WordPress, right? So Rebecca asks, what are the limits to WooCommerce? When do you know you've reached the end of the road and you can't improve performance further? Well, I haven't found it yet, but I am a very specific, unique case, right? I worked on a project with several other people 2 years ago where we got WooCommerce to run up to 2,000 add to cart events per minute. So 2,000 different instances of adding something to your cart within a single minute, and then it was that minute after another minute after another minute all day, right? 2,000 add to carts per minute. At the end of the day, right, that site did $1.6 million where the average SKU cost $6, right, in a single day. So I haven't found a bunch of stores that need performance beyond that, right? That wasn't the end all for us, but that was definitely, we spent, a lot of money to get us to that place, which made it worth it for them, right? They were able to hit that target and do a ridiculous amount of growth in that year as we were optimizing that store, right? So WooCommerce, the issue with WooCommerce, the beautiful thing about WooCommerce is open source, it's code, it's available, you can see how it works, you can make changes. That's awesome. The challenge is that if you don't know what changes to make, if you don't know how to make those changes, then WooCommerce can feel like anything else. Like, I don't know what to do. But if your site is store, I have a buddy of mine I talked to just the other day whose site is really slow on Shopify, which is, by the way, not normal, right? But they're on some sort of server that's not doing well. My buddy's called Shopify a couple of times, can't get him to change, right? Because then he has literally no control over the speed and performance of his store. With WooCommerce, you do, right? If you get the right hosting, you get the right agency partner, you write the right code and make tweaks to the right places, you can definitely make it scale. And so, a couple years ago, people thought WooCommerce couldn't do it. The reality is, you totally can, right? All right, I'm going really long because it turns out I got a lot more questions here. So let me get to the next one, right? What tools do you use to measure performance speed? We use a whole bunch. So web page test, page speeds over at GTmetrix too, right? We have also automated performance tests that are running using load impact. So there's a lot of tools we use to be able to assess the performance of a particular store, right? How much does it cost for you guys? Frida says, how much does it cost for you guys to implement all these things? Well, we don't implement all these things, like all the lists that I went through. We don't normally implement all of them. We will implement a couple of them as part of our managed WooCommerce offering. So if you're hosted with us, we don't charge extra to go in and help you tweak some things and get you better. But if you have a whole list of things you want to do and changing themes and changing stuff like that, we have several partners that we work with that we would recommend, right? All right, to allocate more RAM than your database size, is this RAM on the server or in the line of code in the WP config PHP defined memory limit? So this is not the defined memory limit. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the RAM on your server. And so it often means contacting your server to say, hey, I want more RAM than I have, and I want to be able to load all my database into that RAM, and then they can help you do that, right? So Johnny says, assuming the site is optimized to a basic level, do you think WooCommerce can handle thousands of products, such as an automotive parts e-commerce store? Should a person consider others? Well, as I mentioned earlier, right, 2,000 add to carts per minute is definitely possible. So nothing about an automotive parts e-commerce store scares me. The reality is that often the problem with the automotive parts situation is that it's parts configurator, right? You go, I want to pick what year my car is. I want to pick what make, what model, what year, maybe even what package is on it, right? So I go, oh, I got a Mercedes E550. I have a 2018 Mercedes E550 with the package 3, and now I want to know how do I change the paddle shifters, right? Or how do I change the brake pads, or how and so that configuration often has a lot of queries associated with it, right? Because you're doing a lot of filtering. So there are some ways to get around it through filtering without queries, or at least to pre-cache some of those queries so that you're filtering. So Elasticsearch and Algolia are things that you could do. You can definitely do it. You just it takes a little work, right? You got to know what you're doing, right? Rebecca said, interesting and thanks, right? Probably to an answer of one of my questions. Another question, do you have agency partners you recommend in Germany? Well, Germany is a whole nother ballgame, right? Just so we're clear, there is a different version of WooCommerce for Germany, and there are different data requirements in Germany. So let me ping my team and see if we have someone that we can recommend. Rebecca, you can email me at chris@liquidweb.com, I think, and I will get that information for you, right? And then, hey, Danny says, should Google page speed insights be taken serious? So I find that whether you're talking about Google page speed or whether you're talking about GT metrics or whether you're talking about web page test, any of these, that someone somewhere is going to say, oh, this is BS, this is not true, this is whatever, right? The reality is that every tool is imperfect, and yet every tool can help you evaluate the delta, right? What do I mean by the delta? Doesn't matter what it says, right? Let's say that it says your page takes 4 seconds to load, but you're watching it load, right? And not you, but you go spin up another computer, another server, you have other people to watch. Time to first byte's really short, and the page is loading fast, and you're going, I think something's going on, right? Hotjar has this problem. If you look at a website that's using Hotjar, which is just a plugin that records what people are doing in the background, and you look at Hotjar in GT metrics, right? The way GT metrics makes the call out and the way it pulls it all down, it forces Hotjar to get all the components pulled down all at once. Whereas if you're using it on a regular site, it does not pull it down all at once. It streams it over. And so performance-wise, it looks really bad on GT metrics, and it doesn't look as bad in real life. And you go, okay, but that's not the point. The point isn't just what does it say and does that match reality. The reality of using these tools is, what does it say before I make a change, and what does it say after I make a change? So a lot of people fight these tools because they're like, that's not perfectly accurate to my situation. My response is, I don't use it for that. I use it for, now I have a baseline number, whatever that number is. Now let me go make some changes and check the next one. And as you do that, you can use many of these tools to help you get a handle on, are the changes I'm making it better or making it worse? All right, Frida said, how do you get help? And so Frida, if you want to email me at chris@liquidweb.com, I think I'm going to double check with Myra, our organizer, but Myra, I think that email works, right? chris@liquidweb.com?
Yes, it does.
Awesome. So Frida, if you want to follow up, we have several partners that we recommend. If you send me some information, and this is for any of you, if you send me information about your situation, right? Here's what's going on. Here's some of the challenge. Here's what we're dealing with. I'll be more than happy to make some recommendations and get some companies to look at what you're up to and see if they can help you. And she said, great. And I think we got through all the questions. And then Danny wants to say, hey, thank you. That was wonderful, and looking forward to more in the future. Awesome. Well, I'm really glad that we were able to do that. I have another one I don't think we've scheduled yet on how to scope e-commerce projects, right? So I'll work with Myra to get it on the books so we can talk more about scoping e-commerce projects. These are all the questions you want to ask customers before you start on a project so that you don't lose your shirt. So we'll get that scheduled as well. And so with that, I will say thank you very much. Again, my name is Chris Lemma. I'm the VP of Product over at Liquid Web. You can find me on Twitter at Chris Lemma, and we will make sure that this recording and the slides get out to you as soon as possible. Thanks a lot.